Hi, this is Priya Kannan. Today, I would like to discuss with you on some of the key roles that a parent can, they're perhaps already doing, but some of the pointers that I thought I might like to highlight, which might help in bringing about a nurturing environment for your child, especially through their growing up years, in terms of being nurturing, just not on an academic level, but also for their overall development. So I have about 6 or 7 points that I would really like to discuss today. The first point that I think is crucial and which is very obvious for most parents and something that is not often remembered perhaps is be a role model to your child. That's number one. You already are. Why? Because in the early years of your child, you've had plenty of things that you've done together, exploring nature together, reading together, cooking together, counting together, and so on. So you've already got that established pattern. Your child's first teacher, and perhaps a teacher throughout the life, is you, a parent, is you, the mother or the father. Because the child first and foremost learns to imbibe and imitate their immediate surroundings, their immediate comforting circle, and that would be parents first and foremost. So as the child grows, the parents' role continues to evolve throughout their lifetime. It just doesn't end by the time that the child finishes off schooling. It doesn't ever happen that way. There's always a learning that only a parent can do. That's why you are parents, and you have a very special role to play throughout the lifetime, throughout your lifetime. And for as long as you're there for your child, they will always learn something or the other from you, whether it's learning at a very early age of their lives, a simple rhyme, or exploring nature together, or doing some fun activity together. This can always continue throughout their lifetimes, throughout their growing up years, and your role continues to evolve with their growing up years. So it's very crucial that you play the right role as their role models. So when the child is ready at the age of 2, when the child is ready for formal school, what can you do? You can perhaps explain to the child that a school is going to extend that learning that you've already been doing together with them from the time, 0 to the time that they're ready for formal school. So why is this important? Because a child should first and foremost look forward to the idea of leaving their comforting circle and going into a new environment where they're also going to be learning. So they should understand that it doesn't have to be a scary thing for them, because at a very tender age, the only thing that the child knows is the mother and the father and the grandparents and so on. So they're going to leave, they're going to break free, and they're going to be given some wings, as it were, to learn to fly. So you're basically, as their role model, you need to explain this fact. What would they be doing in school, that the school is going to be merely an extension of all the activities you've been doing together, and how exciting and fun it's going to be, so that the child has something to look forward to go to school. So that's number one, be a good role model to your child. Number 2, and this is very important, and unfortunately for whatever reasons, often it's overlooked, or not enough emphasis and importance is given to this, which is pay attention to your child. This is the most thing that you can do for your child, not just in the early stages. In the early stages, it's all the more important that you do it, but pay attention first. Pay attention to what they have to say, even when they're adults. If there is that give and take right from the beginning, if you've established that sort of a rapport with your kids, it's going to be there throughout your lives as well. They will also equally learn to acknowledge and respect your point of views as they grow into adults. So this give and take conversation, and this giving importance to what they have to say, rather than brushing something aside just because you as a parent know better. Of course you as a parent know better, because they haven't had the sort of life experiences that you've had. But having said that, you still need to acknowledge that for a 2-year-old, what he or she has to say is age appropriate for them. So you should not look at them with the lens of a 20-something-year-old or 30-something-year-old or 40-something-year-old when you're dealing with somebody who has a considerable age difference. And having been through those stages yourself in your life, you, as the bigger person, has to have that empathy and that understanding to hear out what they have to say first. This is crucial, and I cannot stress the importance of this. But coming back to childhood years, what I would say is pay attention to them. It's by far the most important thing, because anything that they do at this age, they really want to try and impress you. They really want to make you happy, because you're their life. You are their center pillar. You're the only ones that they know anyway. You know, especially in that age group of 0 to 6, you are their world. They might have other friends. They're just about starting to explore the world. They're just about starting that social interaction. But please do pay attention to what your child has to say. See what he loves. Find out what is it that he or she likes. For instance, observe when a child is in action. Just observe. Is he a talker? Is he a shy person? See what it is that makes them click. This is very important. This is very important, because not only is a good play school going to lay the right foundation for them, but as a parent, and I've said this in previous videos and to parents whom I've met in person as well, that this is one of the key things that you'll be doing. It's a three-way relationship. The play school, the parent, and the child. It's a three-way relationship for that foundation to be a strong and a broad one. So please pay attention to how your child learns and tune in to that way of explaining to them whatever it is, whether you're instilling some basic values in them, trying to show them what is right from what is wrong, or teaching them alphabets or rhymes or maths or whatever it is. It's very important that you first understand what your child loves. How do they do it? Find out what interests him and help him through that interest. Then you've got their attention. And once you do this, you will know how to get their attention for life. And they will also emerge as smart individuals. They will also learn how to understand and how to listen to another person, how to get the attention of somebody else that they are trying to convey a message to. So this is very important. That's point number 2, which is pay attention to what your child loves. And in context with the same point, I'm going to also add on to another point, which is tune into how your child learns as well. This is important. Why? I've said this in previous videos. Again, I'm sorry to repeat this. Different children learn different ways. Just because 2 kids are siblings doesn't mean that they will learn and assimilate information and absorb the world in exactly the same way. Just because they're siblings doesn't mean that they have to learn the same way or understand the same way as their siblings do. It never happens. So first and foremost, as young parents, you need to bear this in mind, so that there are no comparisons made ever with either your own, amongst your own children, or with the neighbor's child and your child. There is no right or wrong way to learning. There is just the way that your child learns, and it's up to you to really tune into how they learn. Some children learn best when they hear, through hearing. Some children learn best by making and seeing pictures. They learn visually. They're much more visually inclined. And some children, they learn by way of, let's say, building blocks or working on clay and so on. So try and understand what it is that their natural inclination is towards, and work at explaining. Once you get this, once you understand how your child is learning, then it becomes easier for you to explain even difficult concepts. For instance, like say your child is in 3rd grade or 4th grade or 5th grade or 10th grade, it doesn't matter. But let's say you're trying to explain difficult topics or difficult concepts. You already know what it is that they are tuned into. So through that way, this is what we actually mean by conceptual learning. You see, it has to have some sort of applicability to what you're doing in day-to-day life. So once you tune in with what they are learning, or how they would like to go about assimilating information, or how they are actually doing it in the natural way of things, in the natural order of things, then you can teach them, explain those concepts through those ways. So it's very important that you tune into that first. First, understand and identify how your child learns. Once you do that, then you can draw pictures together, you can explain some difficult topics by way of drawing charts together, or building models, even singing songs and rhymes together and so on. It could just be fun for them as well as for you. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be at tatters trying to explain something which could be done perhaps in another way much more easily. So it's important that you tune into how your child learns. So that's point number 3. Point number 4, and this is equally important, which is connect your child's learning to everyday life. Now, what do I mean by this? In the previous point, I just touched base with something called conceptual learning, and I've mentioned this before as well in other videos, as well as to parents in person. What do we mean by conceptual learning? Conceptual learning means what you learn in school has to have some practical applicability to everyday life, to what it is that you're doing, be it your vocation, your career, job, or business, or your day-to-day life. What is its applicability? If there's no applicability, then it really has no value. I could just read something for the sake of reading, and if I don't associate it with everyday life, I would just as easily forget it. By the time I finish my first class 1 and I go on to class 2, I would have already forgotten what I've learned in class 1. I could build upon some things that I vaguely remember. But if I was given an opportunity to connect what I had learned from a very young age, and this is very, very important, because you need to start this very early on. This is not something you just do when the child is about to take his board exams in his class 10 or class 12. This has as much applicability from the time a child is 2 years old to that of the time that a child, finishes school and goes into graduating. That's why in our school at Shemrock Sree in Chromepet, we specifically have models like, we have an entire concept area, or we introduce these concepts by way of showing them what a petrol bunk is. What do they do in a petrol bunk? Because child should be able to relate to it. We have an ATM, we have the concept of a bank and a model ATM, wherein a child knows, okay, so this is the place where my mom goes to get money out. So they should know what it is for and what do they do there. So there are a lot of practical things, like we'll have a small market sort of area where we'll make the child transact. You see, a child may not learn to count at the age of 2. It's very difficult. They'll just about learn numbers. But if you've already given them that much needed exposure every day, and you have a specific structured learning, such as the one that we have in our school particularly, where we introduce the child to transacting, they understand that a currency is not just a piece of paper that you can tear and just throw it away without. You understand that the currency has some value. How do you introduce that value? By saying that you get this, then you're going to get something in return. So that transactional value is there for the currency, and this is something that the child learns and imbibes from an early on age. Now, once the child is perhaps 3 or 4, by the time they come into LKG or UKG, how can you connect this learning to their everyday life? You could do counting together. If the child is slightly more older, you could do something like, say, when you're working in your kitchen, you could do some measuring math. If the child is even more older and has slightly more advanced knowledge of science or something particularly, you could, when you're working on a blender, you could show to them how a blender works. You never know, they might turn out to be great engineers, you don't know. Or you could just show to them other ideas, day-to-day life, what you do has to have, you need to be able to connect that with your child's learning in a practical way. This is what we mean by conceptual learning. Actually, this is what is meant by conceptual learning, notwithstanding whether you're a Montessori or multiple intelligences. Most good schools, most good play schools and preschool will have this conceptual learning exclusively, because this is the key thing that brings the child out very, very smart. By the time that they finish their preschool and they're ready for the grade 1 primary level, they already come out as really smart kids, in comparison to other kids at a comparable age, perhaps from another school where they've not had this sort of an exposure. So it's important that you connect your child's learning to everyday life. Also, see, one other thing you need to do, and I can't stress enough the importance of this, is to set aside time to read. Read together. If the child is able to read together. How could you do that? Well, you could, for starters, let the child pick the books that they like. It doesn't have to be the most difficult textbook. It doesn't have to be the most boring book that you think is really interesting from a vocabulary point of view, or from a literature point of view and so on. Just let them pick their own books and allow them to read. So what you can do is first introduce the child to everyday reading, especially if the child is a reluctant reader. What you could do is, when you read out aloud, the child is exposed to the structure and vocabulary of good literature, and this is very important. This will get them really interested in reading further, because that's their first exposure. You have to read it out to them aloud for a while, until the child, on his or her own volition, comes to you and says, okay, you know what, I'd also like to read with you, or I'll read today and you read tomorrow. Make it a fun activity. It doesn't have to be an exercise and a chore for the child. Just make it a fun activity. Allow them to choose a book of their choice. One day you could read a paragraph and they could read a paragraph, or you could just alternate it between the two of you and read for a while. Just a little bit of an exercise every day will get it going. One thing that we need to understand, and this is very important, is just because you put your child in an English medium school does not translate to proficiency in English language. Please, I'll repeat it again. Just because your child is studying in an English medium school, it's not enough on its own to grasp and have a command of spoken English. This is very, very, very important that parents understand this. That's why you get them started with reading. Let them have this play of words, let them get used to this rhythm of speaking good English, or for that matter, any language that they are getting trained in. Let them get used to it. How practice makes a person perfect. This is especially so when you have to imbibe or instill in you a certain knowledge, and this is very important. So please bear in mind, the more practice the child has, the more command he's going to have. The native language is something that's taken for granted. Why? Because it's something that the child hears from the time that he or she is born, and it's going to be there. It's going to keep ringing in their minds, because that's often the language at least someone or the other will speak to us in our families. If not our own parents, let's say our grandparents or some cousin or some relative, uncle, aunt, somebody or the other will keep talking to them in the native language. And particularly if they are in a surrounding where the city or the state that they live in speaks the same language, it's easy to pick it up. But a language that is not often spoken, you cannot take it for granted that you're just going to automatically be able to speak it just because you're studying in an English medium school and you can read two sentences together. It doesn't happen that way. Practice is important. And how do you instill that practice in them? One, you could perhaps get them started talking in English by you introducing a few sentences yourself in English with them. If you can't do that, at least get them to read out loud. Reading out loud, not in their minds, when they read out loud, especially in the early stages when there is a lot less inhibition in them and they're comfortable in their own surroundings, in their own environment in the house. So you get alongside with them and read along with them out loud, so that this play of words and this dancing of syllables and this rhythmic pattern in their tongues, and they get used to it. And they would automatically be able to converse in English. At least they'll have enough confidence to get started at some point. If somebody were to ask them a question, they won't be just tongue-tied. They'll be able to respond nicely and in an appropriate way. So get them started early on, and that's by far the best thing you'll be doing for your child in this day and age. And I cannot stress enough the importance of this. Don't overlook the fact that you need to know English. If you overlook it, it would be very short-sighted and perhaps not a very smart thing to do, because you need to know more than one language, and you need to know one international language at least, which is English. So please get your child started early on. So that's setting aside time to read together. Now, one of the things, and this is especially true for now more than any other point in time, is because it's a lockdown. Please reduce the TV time to a minimum. Why? Because TV can control and take over the child's agenda completely, to a point where the mind becomes dull. The child is not given enough time or opportunity to explore on their own. That if you have unstructured time for television, it will just literally control their agenda, and you're not going to be able to give the child the chance to develop their own interests and explore on their own. But having said this, the same thing, the same unstructured time, if you were to give to your child when it comes to toys, games, playtime with their friends, books, crafts, and so on, that now will allow them to develop their own interests and to explore on their own. So unstructured time when it comes to all these other activities is highly recommended for children, especially in the growing up years. But unstructured time in front of TV will actually damage him. It won't do any good. You can allow him to have TV time as well, but that cannot be to a point where the child dictates his terms and you just give in just because he has tantrums. You as a parent is the first and foremost responsibility, and bear in mind you're the biggest role model for your child throughout your life. So just make sure that you're the right role model to them, not the sort of role model that'll give in because they're crying or or they're having their tantrums. You have to bring them around because they don't know what is right from what is wrong, what is good from what is not for them when they're growing up early years. That's why you're the parent and they are the child. So keep this in mind, and keep these points in mind, and do your best. Now, one last but equally important point that I want to say is, don't overschedule your child. I know many parents think that having extracurricular activities will complement their studies, and it is true to some extent. But at the same time, if a child has a homework, a music lesson, a karate class, let's say some specific sport that they have to play, which is very important for their gross motor skills to develop, so you have to allow them some playtime, of course. And on top of it, particularly because it's India, not just because it's India, I mean the same thing happens even abroad, so it makes no difference. Let's say a sloka class or something else. Do you really think that your child is going to come out all-rounded, well-rounded, really smart? Or do you think he is going to be burdened by too much too soon? It's okay to have extracurricular activities, but it is not okay to cramp his day to a point where he doesn't have any downtime. So you have to bear in mind, a child needs his or her downtime as much as they need, as much as they have the need to pursue their extracurricular activities. And parents need to keep this in mind. So observe your child and see if he or she is actually truly enjoying these extracurricular activities. If not, please, for God's sakes, just cut off some of their activities off the schedule. You'll be doing a world of good to them. So don't overburden, don't overschedule your child. This is very important, and that was the last point I wanted to make. And I hope these 7 or 8 points which I've just made, you would take it in, you would take it on board going forward. And I hope it's of some practical value to you as parents, whether your child is 2 years or whether your child is 10 years or whether your child is 17, it doesn't matter. I hope these pointers will these are life lessons. It takes you a long way in building a very nurturing relationship, a strong relationship, a very solid relationship with your children. And I hope this video is useful to you for all the reasons that I've just mentioned, and I will see you soon with another video which will be hopefully as useful as this one. Thank you.